Imagine planning a simple 3-day solo camping trip in one of America's most beautiful mountain ranges, only to find yourself fighting for survival for nearly a month in freezing blizzards with no food, no phone signal, and no way home. This is the true story of Tiffany Slaton, a 27-year-old woman from Jeffersonville, Georgia, who went missing in California's Sierra Nevada mountains in April 2025 and was miraculously found alive on May 14th, just one day before her 28th birthday. Her tale is one of perseverance, raw survival instinct, and a little bit of luck. Today, we dive deep into what really happened, straight from official reports, the Fresno County Sheriff's Office, and Tiffany's own words in her press conference after the rescue. Tiffany Slaton was no stranger to the outdoors. She loved nature, hiking, and adventure. As a trained horticulturist, permaculturalist, and someone with a background in high-level archery, where precision, patience, and self-reliance were essential, she had built a deep connection to the natural world over the years. She often described herself as someone who found peace in challenging her limits in the wilderness, whether through foraging edible plants, navigating trails, or simply immersing herself in remote landscapes. In mid-April 2025, she decided to embark on a solo trip to California, viewing it as a meaningful bucket list experience before committing more fully to her medical career aspirations. She flew from her home in Jeffersonville, Georgia, to the Fresno area, where she rented an electric bike equipped with a red trailer to transport her gear along the winding Forest Service roads leading into the Sierra Nevada foothills. On or around April 14th, she set off toward Mono Hot Springs, a remote and scenic geothermal area nestled high in Fresno County near Huntington Lake and Shaver Lake. The destination appealed to her for its natural hot pools, quiet trails through pine forests and alpine meadows, and the promise of solitude amid stunning mountain views. Her plan was straightforward and modest: 3 days of camping, hiking, relaxing in the hot springs, and enjoying the crisp mountain air before heading back home, refreshed and recharged. She packed basic supplies suited exactly for a short trip: a lightweight tent, 2 sleeping bags for insulation against cool nights, a small portable stove with fuel, compact food rations such as energy bars, nuts, and dehydrated meals calculated for 3 days, warm clothing layers, a multi-tool knife, a lighter, basic first aid items, and her phone for occasional check-ins when signal allowed. She regularly communicated with her parents, Bobby and Frederina Slaton, sharing brief updates, photos of serene lakes and towering granite peaks, and messages that conveyed her excitement and sense of calm. "The mountains are incredible," she might have texted, "feeling peaceful and alive here." For the first several days, everything proceeded as planned. The early spring weather in the lower elevations was mild, with wildflowers blooming along roadsides and the scent of pine resin filling the air. She ascended gradually toward the higher country, where snow still lingered in shaded areas and trails could be muddy from meltwater. Her last known communication came around April 20th, likely a text or call reassuring her family she was doing well. After that, silence. At first, her parents assumed it was due to poor cell service in the deep canyons or a dead battery, issues common in remote backcountry. But as days stretched into a full week with no word, deep worry set in. 9 days passed without any contact. On April 29th, 2025, her family reported her missing to authorities. The Fresno County Sheriff's Office took the report seriously and launched an investigation. What had begun as quiet concern for a daughter on a brief vacation quickly escalated into a full-scale search operation in one of California's most rugged and unpredictable mountain regions. Tiffany later explained that she officially considered herself lost around April 22nd, a date that marked the abrupt unraveling of what had been a promising adventure into something far more perilous and isolating. Up until that point, her journey had felt manageable, the trails winding through dense stands of Jeffrey pine and white fir, the occasional glimpse of a mule deer, or the distant call of a raven providing fleeting companionship in the vastness. She had been steadily ascending toward Mono Hot Springs, her spirits lifted by the crisp mountain air and the anticipation of steaming hot pools amid the snow. But the Sierra Nevada, for all its beauty, is a landscape that demands unwavering respect. Its transitions from forested foothills to exposed alpine ridges can happen in a heartbeat, and in late April 2025, the weather patterns were particularly fickle, with lingering winter fronts pushing south from the Pacific, bringing unpredictable bursts of precipitation and dropping temperatures. She was heading toward Mono Hot Springs, navigating what she believed to be a familiar route based on maps and her growing confidence as a solo traveler, when disaster struck with shocking suddenness. The path she was on, likely a mix of established trail and off-path shortcuts to shave time, had grown increasingly steep and obscured by patches of lingering snow from the previous night's chill. The ground underfoot was a treacherous mosaic, firm earth giving way to slick ice hidden beneath a thin crust of melt, loose scree from eroded slopes, and sudden drops masked by overhanging branches or snowdrifts. Tiffany, carrying her pack and moving with the steady rhythm of someone attuned to the outdoors, perhaps paused to adjust her footing or catch a breath when the edge gave way. In her own words, from the press conference, shared with a quiet intensity that belied the trauma. I fell off a cliff or steep slope, tumbling down a mountainside. It wasn't a sheer precipice like those dramatized in survival tales, but a sharp, uncontrolled descent, a cascade of rolling, sliding, and impacting against unyielding rock and frozen ground. The fall unfolded in a blur of motion and shock. She described it later as feeling like an eternity compressed into seconds. The initial slip, the desperate grab for a root or branch that tore free, the body twisting midair before slamming into the slope. Rocks bruised her ribs and arms. Jagged edges scraped skin through her clothing. Snow cushioned some impacts, but offered no mercy against the cold that seeped in immediately. Branches whipped at her face and limbs, leaving welts and cuts. The momentum carried her farther than she expected, perhaps 50 or 100 feet down a 30 to 40 degree incline, until friction and exhaustion brought her to a stop in a tangle of underbrush and snow at the base. The impact knocked her unconscious for about 2 hours, a merciful blackout amid the chaos, her body going limp as the world faded to black. In that void, there was no pain, no awareness of time passing, just the instinctive shutdown of a system overwhelmed. When she woke up, the forest had shifted around her, the sun lower in the sky, casting long shadows through the canopy, the air heavier with the metallic tang of impending storm. Disorientation hit first. Where was she? Which way was up? Her head throbbed with a dull ache from the jolt, vision swimming as she tried to sit. Then came the pain, a searing, all-consuming fire radiating from her knee, where the joint had twisted unnaturally during the tumble. It was badly injured, swollen to twice its size almost immediately, bruised purple-black, with a deep sprain or possible partial dislocation that made even the slightest shift feel like knives grinding bone. Drawing on her background as a dialysis technician with some medical training, she assessed it grimly. Not shattered, but far from functional. She had to act. With gritted teeth and tears streaming, she improvised a splint from nearby branches and strips torn from a spare shirt, binding it tightly. Later, in a moment of raw determination, she even managed to pop her knee back into place herself, a maneuver she described as the most painful thing I've ever done, suppressing screams to avoid alerting any potential wildlife or expending unnecessary energy. Bruises bloomed across her arms, legs, and torso like dark constellations. Scrapes wept blood. Her head wound trickled steadily, forcing her to staunch it with fabric. Compounding the physical agony was the growing realization of her predicament. Her path back to the main road, or any recognizable trail, was utterly blocked. Not just by the steep, now snow-obscured incline she'd tumbled down, but possibly by fresh avalanche debris or heavy snow from a sudden blizzard that had begun to build while she lay unconscious. The High Sierra was unleashing one of its classic late spring tantrums. Dark clouds boiling over the ridgeline, wind picking up to a keening howl that stripped needles from pines and sent loose snow swirling like sand. What started as flurries escalated into a full whiteout, dumping inches of heavy, wet snow in hours, the kind that clings and accumulates, turning the landscape into a featureless void. Tiffany's gear had fared no better than she had. Her pack, flung during the fall, lay scattered several yards away. The tent was torn along one seam, useless for immediate shelter. One sleeping bag shredded on rocks. Food rations spilled and partially buried, some irretrievable. Her phone, if it had survived the impact, now showed no signal bars. The remote ravine she found herself in was a dead zone for cell towers miles away. The Sierra Nevada in late April can be brutally unforgiving, a season of deceptive calm shattered by extremes that catch even seasoned hikers off guard. Daytime highs might tease the mid-40s Fahrenheit in sunlit clearings, offering brief respite for movement, but afternoons often cloud over with Pacific moisture funneled into the range, spawning snow squalls that bury trails under fresh feet of powder. Nights plunge to the low 20s or teens, with wind chills dropping effective temperatures below zero, turning exposed skin numb in minutes. Deep snow blocks not just paths, but entire drainages, creating hidden crevasses or slushy mires that swallow boots to the knee. Wildlife goes quiet or hunkers down. Streams freeze at edges, complicating water access. Tiffany hadn't packed for this. Her gear was calibrated for 3 days of mild camping, not indefinite exposure to winter's remnants. No heavy parka, no snowshoes, no satellite communicator. Just layers that now felt woefully thin against the gathering chill. Her electric bike, left secured at the trailhead days earlier, was now as distant and irrelevant as civilization itself. Useless in snowdrifts, even if she could reach it, its battery likely drained from the cold. In the immediate aftermath, survival instincts kicked in over panic. She gathered what she could, the intact sleeping bag for minimal insulation, remaining rations inventoried, enough for perhaps one more day if rationed severely. Her knife and lighter secured in a pocket. She tried to retrace her steps, hauling herself up the slope hand over hand, using roots and rocks as precarious handholds, her splinted knee screaming with every pull. But the blizzard intensified, visibility dropping to mere yards, snow accumulating fast enough to erase her own tracks. What took minutes to descend now seemed an insurmountable wall, slick, unstable, and endless. Hours of effort yielded only exhaustion, and a few dozen yards gained, forcing her to abandon the climb. Instead, she veered laterally, hoping to skirt the blockage and link up with a parallel trail. But disorientation deepened. The fall had scrambled her sense of direction, and the storm's roar drowned out any auditory cues, like rushing water or wind patterns. Over the next weeks, despite the mounting injuries and environmental assault, Tiffany moved with a dogged persistence that would later astonish rescuers. She covered what she estimated as about 20 miles on foot in total, not in straight lines, but in a meandering, pain-fueled zigzag through ravines, over ridge lines, and along frozen creek beds. Sometimes she climbed thousands of feet in elevation gain, scrambling up granite faces or snow-choked couloirs, her breath ragged and hands raw from gripping icy holds. Other times, descents were equally grueling, sliding on her backside to spare her knee, only to jar it on hidden boulders below. "I literally got over quite a few of the mountains," she recounted in the press conference, her voice steady but eyes distant, as if reliving the vertigo of those exposed traverses. Each advance was a victory against odds stacked high. The constant throb of her knee, now compounded by blisters and frost-nipped toes. The gnawing uncertainty of direction, guided only by the sun's faint arc through clouds or the downward pull of gravity toward potential water. The psychological weight of isolation, where every shadow hinted at bear or cougar, every gust whispered defeat. Yet through it all, Tiffany's mindset remained remarkably composed. Drawing from her archery discipline, where a single errant thought can ruin a shot, she focused on micro goals: one more ridge, one more edible plant spotted, one more night endured. Panic, she knew, was the true killer in emergencies. It burns energy, clouds judgment, invites mistakes. Instead, she rationed her thoughts as tightly as her calories, channeling fear into fuel. Family anchored her. Flashes of her parents' faces, imagined conversations over dinner back home, the promise of a birthday hug on May 15th. This wasn't just survival. It was defiance, a refusal to let a momentary slip erase her story. But as days blurred into a haze of snow and strain, the wilderness pressed in, testing whether that resolve alone could carry her through. For nearly 3 weeks, from late April into mid-May 2025, Tiffany Slaton survived alone in the high Sierra Nevada, a period that stretched into what felt like an endless cycle of cold, hunger, pain, and unyielding determination. The days blurred together in a monotonous rhythm dictated by the sun's arc, the arrival of storms, and the slow drain of her body's reserves. Yet each one carried its own small battles and quiet victories that kept her alive. She had no calendar, no watch that still functioned after the fall, but she marked time by the changing light, the waxing and waning of hunger pangs, and the entries she scratched into whatever scraps of paper or bark she could salvage, a makeshift journal born of necessity to hold on to sanity amid the silence. The first days after the fall were the most disorienting. Waking from her 2-hour blackout, Tiffany's immediate priority was shelter and warmth. The blizzard that had begun during her unconsciousness continued to rage, dumping heavy, wet snow that piled up quickly and turned the forest floor into a white sea. She dragged herself to the nearest natural cover, a cluster of large granite boulders that formed a shallow alcove, partially shielded from the wind. Using her knife, she cut branches from nearby fallen pine limbs, dragging them over to create a crude windbreak and a bed of sorts. She wrapped herself in the one remaining intact sleeping bag, huddling tight against the rock to conserve heat. Nights were the hardest. Temperatures dropped into the low 20s Fahrenheit, wind chills pushing the effective cold far below zero. She shivered uncontrollably at first, teeth chattering, muscles cramping from the effort to stay warm. To fight hypothermia, she did small movements, flexing fingers and toes, rocking gently. Anything to generate blood flow without expending too much energy. Hunger arrived swiftly and relentlessly. Her 3-day rations, energy bars, nuts, a few dehydrated packets, were gone within the first 48 hours after the fall, scattered, and partially lost during the tumble. By day 3, her stomach was a constant hollow ache. She turned to foraging, relying on the knowledge she had built as a permaculturalist and gardener back home. The Sierra in spring offered limited but viable options: wild leeks, wild garlic, or ramps, which grew in moist, shaded pockets near streams or under snowmelt. Their pungent, onion-like bulbs and greens were her primary food source. She dug them carefully with her knife, washing them in snowmelt when possible, chewing slowly to extract every bit of nutrition. The flavor was sharp and bitter at first, but it became comforting, a reminder that life persisted even here. She estimated she foraged enough to sustain minimal calories each day, perhaps 800, 1,000 if she was lucky. "I'm pretty good at foraging," she said later in the press conference, adding that her hospital blood work came back surprisingly stable. No severe deficiencies, a testament to both her skills and the nutrient density of what she found. She supplemented with any other edible greens she recognized: young dandelion leaves, pine needle tea for vitamin C when she could boil water. Water was less of a problem than one might expect in a snowy environment, but it required effort. She scooped handfuls of fresh snow, letting it melt slowly in her mouth or pressed against her skin to avoid the shock of ice-cold liquid hitting an empty stomach. When she could risk a small fire, using her lighter and dry tinder scavenged from under overhanging rocks or the inner bark of dead trees, she melted snow in a small metal cup from her kit, boiling it for safety. Fires were precious and short-lived. Wind often snuffed them. Wet wood refused to catch, and she conserved the lighter fluid religiously, knowing it was one of her last lifelines. "I was outside with nothing but a lighter and a knife by the later stages," she recounted. "Everything else, either lost, destroyed, or abandoned to lighten her load as she moved." The weather tested her daily. She endured multiple blizzards, heavy snow driven by high winds, visibility dropping to a few feet, temperatures plunging. Reports from her account mention up to 13 significant snow events over those weeks, each one a grueling ordeal. One storm in particular felt apocalyptic. Winds howling through the trees like freight trains, snow horizontal and stinging, forcing her to burrow deeper into her rock shelter for hours. She described being caught in what seemed like an avalanche, not a full wall of snow, but a sudden rush down a nearby slope, the roar deafening as powder poured over her hiding spot. She scrambled aside just in time, heart pounding, knee flaring in fresh agony. The cold seeped into her bones. Frost nipped at exposed skin. Her fingers and toes went numb, forcing her to rub them vigorously to restore circulation. Minimal shelter was all she had. Rock outcrops, fallen logs leaned against boulders, shallow snow trenches. She dug with her hands and knife. She layered pine boughs over herself for insulation when possible, creating a crude nest that trapped body heat. Movement became both salvation and torment. Her injured knee, swollen, bruised, unstable despite the splint, made every step a calculation of pain versus progress. She limped, hopped, crawled when necessary, using trekking poles improvised from sturdy branches. Despite this, she covered ground, roughly 20 miles total, often in arduous climbs of thousands of feet elevation gain. "I literally got over quite a few of the mountains," she said simply, describing traverses across exposed ridges where wind threatened to knock her over, descents down steep couloirs where she slid on her backside to spare the knee, only to jar it on hidden rocks below. Each day, she set micro goals: reach the next stream for water, find a south-facing slope for warmer sun, locate more leeks before dark. She conserved energy meticulously, resting during the worst weather, moving only when conditions allowed. The psychological strain was immense. Isolation pressed in like the cold itself. No voices, no footprints, no distant campfires. The silence was broken only by wind, occasional rockfall, or her own ragged breathing. To combat the creeping despair, she kept her journal religiously. She scribbled on torn paper scraps, bark, even snow with a stick when nothing else was available, daily entries to keep sane. They included small observations. Found more leeks today, thank God. Knee hurts worse but still moving. Thinking of mom and dad, can't let them down. She wrote reminders of home, the smell of her mother's cooking, her father's quiet encouragement, the promise of her upcoming birthday. These entries anchored her mind, turning abstract fear into concrete resolve. She refused to panic, drawing on her archery training where focus under pressure was everything. "The worst thing you can do in an emergency is panic," she emphasized later. Thoughts of family became her anchor. The idea of them grieving, of never seeing them again, fueled a fierce refusal to surrender. As the weeks wore on, exhaustion deepened into bone-weary fatigue. Weight loss set in, about 10 pounds by rescue, muscles atrophying from underuse and poor nutrition. Her eyes strained from constant snow glare, lips cracked and bled from wind and dehydration. Bruises faded to yellow, but new scrapes appeared from thorns and falls. Yet she never stopped. She pushed downhill when possible, following gravity toward potential water and lower, warmer elevations. By early May, she was in survival autopilot. Forage, move, rest, repeat, her body running on reserves and willpower alone. Meanwhile, far above and beyond her sight, the search effort had peaked and begun to wane. From May 6th to 10th, Fresno County Sheriff's search and rescue teams conducted an intensive operation across more than 600 square miles. Helicopters thrummed overhead in grid patterns over Mono Hot Springs and Lake Edison, pilots scanning for any anomaly. A flash of color from her jacket, smoke from a fire, disturbed snow. Ground teams, volunteers, deputies, even small aircraft, pushed into accessible areas, calling her name into the wind. But the terrain was vast and hostile. Kaiser Pass Road remained blocked by deep snowpack, preventing vehicles from reaching deeper zones. No footprints, no gear, no signals. After 5 exhausting days with no trace, officials scaled back on May 10th, a painful but pragmatic decision to preserve resources and safety while awaiting new leads. Tiffany, buried in her own world of rock and snow, never heard the rotors or the calls. The mountains swallowed sound as effectively as they hid her. By May 13th, after yet another punishing climb and descent, Tiffany was nearing collapse, dehydrated, starving, her knee a constant fire, body trembling from cold and exhaustion. In that state of near delirium, she crested a final ridge and spotted something impossible: man-made structures below. Cabins clustered near Lake Edison, part of the Vermilion Valley Resort. The sight hit her like a physical force. Hope, sudden and sharp. She stumbled downward, each step a victory against collapse, until she reached one cabin whose door stood unlocked. A deliberate choice by owner Christopher Gutierrez for exactly this purpose: emergency shelter for lost souls in winter's grip. Tiffany entered. For the first time in weeks, she had four walls, a roof, a floor not made of frozen earth. She collapsed inside, perhaps sleeping deeply for the first time in days, unaware that rescue was mere hours away. On the afternoon of Wednesday, May 14th, 2025, a day that would forever change from ordinary to extraordinary for everyone involved, Christopher Gutierrez, the owner of Vermilion Valley Resort, made his way up the freshly cleared road toward Lake Edison. Snowplows had only just pushed through the final drifts blocking access after weeks of heavy accumulation, allowing seasonal property checks to resume. The resort, a quiet outpost of cabins, a small store, and boat rentals nestled in a remote pocket between Yosemite and Kings Canyon National Parks, typically closes for winter and reopens in late spring or early summer. Gutierrez had come alone to inspect the site, check for storm damage, clear any fallen branches, and prepare the place for the incoming summer visitors. It was routine work, the kind he had done for years in this isolated corner of the Sierra Nevada. As he approached the cluster of cabins near the lake, something immediately caught his eye. One of the structures, a simple wooden cabin he deliberately left unlocked during the off-season, had signs of recent occupation. The door stood slightly ajar. A pair of shoes sat outside on the small porch. Faint tracks in the softening snow led up to it. His first thought was perhaps a curious animal, or wind had disturbed the place, but caution took over. He approached slowly, calling out to announce himself, then pushed the door open wider. Inside, in the dim light filtering through the single window, sat a woman. She was huddled on the floor near the wall, wrapped in what remained of her tattered clothing, visibly exhausted and dehydrated. Her face was gaunt, lips cracked, eyes sunken from weeks of hardship, but unmistakable. She matched the description that had circulated in missing persons alerts for nearly a month. Young, female, mid to late 20s, last seen heading toward Mono Hot Springs. Gutierrez froze for a split second, the reality hitting him like cold air. This was no stray hiker. This was Tiffany Slaton, the woman the entire region had been searching for. Tiffany's reaction was instantaneous and raw. She looked up, registered his presence, and without a word rose to her feet. She crossed the small space in a few unsteady steps and threw her arms around him in a tight, wordless hug. No greeting, no explanation, just the overwhelming need for human contact after weeks of utter solitude. All she wanted was a hug, Christopher later recounted during the joint press conference, his voice thick with emotion. She ran right to me and hugged me tight. It was a pretty surreal moment, and that's when I realized who this was. For several long seconds they stood there, the resort owner and the lost survivor, in silent, shared relief. Tiffany buried her face in his shoulder. He held her gently, careful not to overwhelm her fragile state. One of her first coherent questions, spoken in a hoarse whisper after pulling back slightly, was simple and disorienting. "What day is it?" Gutierrez answered softly, "May 14th, and watched realization dawn on her face. She had lost exact track of time, but the date hit hard. Her 28th birthday was tomorrow. The cabin had been her refuge for only about 8 hours. She had stumbled in the previous evening, collapsed from exhaustion, and slept deeply for the first time in weeks. She had barely moved since entering. The walls, the roof, the simple floor had been enough to let her body finally shut down safely. Gutierrez acted quickly. He offered her immediate aid. From the groceries he had brought for his own stay, he pulled out peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, basic, soft food that required no cooking. Tiffany accepted them gratefully, eating slowly, tears mixing with the first real meal in days. He wrapped her in a spare blanket from his truck, helped her sit comfortably, and immediately used his satellite phone to contact the Fresno County Sheriff's Office. The call was brief, but urgent. "I've found the missing hiker. She's alive. Send help right away." Deputies and medics responded with impressive speed, navigating the still marginal road conditions to reach the resort. When they arrived, they confirmed her identity through photos and details. It was indeed Tiffany Slaton. Initial medical assessment on site showed she was severely dehydrated, her skin dry, eyes glassy, pulse weak but steady, but remarkably stable otherwise. No frostbite, no severe hypothermia, no life-threatening infections despite weeks exposed. Her knee remained badly swollen and bruised, but she had managed to keep it from worsening through her self-splinted care. Bruises and scrapes covered her body, some still raw, but her core temperature and vitals held. Medics started IV fluids immediately, wrapped her in thermal blankets, and prepared for transport. As the group loaded her into the vehicle for the slow drive down the mountain, cell signal gradually returned. Tiffany asked for a phone. With shaking hands, she dialed her father's number. The line connected. On the other end, in Georgia, Bobby Slaton answered. He and Frederina had been living in a state of suspended agony for weeks, checking news alerts hourly, jumping at every unknown call, clinging to hope while fearing the worst. When Tiffany's voice came through, weak but clear, Bobby froze. "Dad, I'm alive, and I'm sorry." The words hung in the air for a heartbeat. Bobby's response was choked. "Who is this?" Fearing a cruel prank? "This is Tiffany." The confirmation shattered the dam. Tears flowed instantly. Frederina, standing beside him in a store aisle, grabbed a nearby stranger and asked for a hug, overwhelmed by joy. "A ton of weight has been lifted," Bobby later told reporters. "This has to be the third or fourth best day of our lives after our children's births." The call lasted only minutes, Tiffany too weak for long conversation. But it was enough. Parents who had braced for tragedy were suddenly planning flights to California. Tiffany was transported to a local hospital for full evaluation and treatment. Doctors marveled at her condition. Dehydration addressed with fluids. Knee injury stabilized. Imaging showed severe sprain and bruising, but no fracture. Minor frost nip treated. Nutrition begun through careful refeeding. She slept for hours under warm blankets, safe at last. The next morning, May 15th, dawned as her 28th birthday. What could have been a day marked by grief became one of profound celebration. Her parents arrived by plane that afternoon, rushing to her bedside for an emotional reunion. Hugs, tears, whispered reassurances. The family that had been separated by mountains and fear was whole again. Christopher Gutierrez's role in the rescue was celebrated quietly but deeply. His decision to leave certain cabins unlocked, a practice rooted in years of experience with the backcountry's dangers, had literally saved a life. "If I hadn't come that day," Tiffany said at the press conference the following day, "I think they would have found my body there." She thanked him repeatedly, her voice cracking with gratitude. Gutierrez, humble in the spotlight, simply said he was glad he had been there at the right moment. The discovery sent ripples through the Fresno County Sheriff's Office and the broader search community. What had been a scaled-back, lingering case suddenly resolved in the most miraculous way possible. Deputies, who had combed hundreds of square miles without a trace, now stood in awe of one woman's endurance and one unlocked door. At a press conference held by the Fresno County Sheriff's Office on May 16, 2025, just 2 days after her rescue, and 1 day after her 28th birthday, Tiffany Slaton stepped forward to share her story publicly for the first time. She appeared composed despite the visible toll of her ordeal, still using crutches to favor her injured knee, her face thinner and eyes carrying the quiet weight of someone who had stared down mortality. She had no prepared speech, no notes. She spoke straight from the heart, her voice steady but soft, occasionally cracking with emotion as she addressed the room full of reporters, deputies, her parents seated nearby, and Christopher Gutierrez standing modestly to the side. She began by expressing profound gratitude, first to the Fresno County Sheriff's Office and their search and rescue teams. "You never gave up looking for me, even when the weather made it impossible. That meant everything." Then to her parents, Bobby and Frederina Slaton, who sat, holding hands, tears already shining in their eyes. "Mom, Dad, I'm so sorry for the worry I caused. I love you more than words can say." And especially to Christopher Gutierrez. "Without Vermilion Valley Resort and that unlocked cabin, I would not be standing here today. If he hadn't come that day to check on the property, I think they would have found my body there." She turned directly to him, voice breaking slightly. "Thank you for saving my life." Gutierrez, visibly moved, simply nodded and said quietly, "I'm just glad I was there at the right time." Tiffany described her survival not as a heroic feat, but as a combination of practical skills, mental discipline, sheer stubbornness, and undeniable luck. "I was outside with nothing but a lighter and a knife by the end," she said, matter-of-factly. "But I knew how to forage. I'm pretty good at it, and I refused to panic. The worst thing you can do in an emergency situation is panic." She credited her background in archery for teaching her focus under pressure, her work as a dialysis technician for basic medical knowledge, like splinting her own knee and popping it back into place, and her permaculture experience for identifying wild leeks and other edibles that kept her nourished enough to keep going. She mentioned her blood work results at the hospital, remarkably stable despite weeks of minimal intake, as evidence that foraging had sustained her far better than anyone expected. She spoke candidly about the mental side of the ordeal. "I journaled every day to try and keep sane," she explained. "Even when I had almost nothing to write on, I wrote down small things, finding more food, making it over another ridge, thinking about my family. It helped me stay grounded." She admitted there were moments of despair, nights when the cold seemed unbearable, days when hunger felt like it would win. but she pushed back with thoughts of home. I didn't want my parents to have to bury me because of something like this. I wanted to see them again, to hug them on my birthday. That kept me moving. Sheriff officials who had overseen the search stood beside her, still visibly awed. Fresno County Sheriff John Zanoni called the outcome miraculous and remarkable. Spokesperson Tony Body added, 3 weeks missing in that terrain and coming out alive is unheard of. Most cases resolve in days, or tragically. Tiffany's tenacity, her knowledge, her will to live were blown away. They emphasized that her survival highlighted the importance of preparation in the backcountry, especially during transitional seasons when the Sierra can flip from spring to winter overnight. In the days and weeks that followed, Tiffany's recovery continued steadily. At the hospital, she received IV fluids, pain management for her knee, nutritional support, and psychological check-ins to process the trauma. She lost about 10 pounds during the ordeal, but regained strength quickly once refeeding began, safely. Physical therapy focused on rebuilding mobility in her knee. Doctors confirmed no permanent damage beyond bruising and sprain that would heal with time. Emotionally, she leaned on family and close friends, slowly unpacking the isolation and fear she had carried alone for so long. Online, her story spread rapidly, shared by news outlets, true crime pages, outdoor forums, and survival communities. While the vast majority reacted with admiration and inspiration, a small number of skeptics emerged on social media, questioning details. How could she survive so long with so little? Was the timeline exact? Why no clearer signs for searchers? Officials addressed these firmly. After multiple interviews, medical examinations, and review of her account, no contradictions appeared. Her physical condition, coherent recounting, and the unlocked cabin's role aligned perfectly with known facts. The sheriff's office stood by her story completely. Tiffany herself used the attention to deliver clear, practical lessons for anyone who ventures into the wilderness. Always over-prepare for weather changes, even in spring, she urged. Carry satellite communication if you're going remote. Cell phones aren't reliable up there. Tell someone your exact plans, including routes and check-in times. Know basic foraging and survival skills. They can make the difference. She added with a wry smile during one interview, I may never do a vacation longer than 3 days ever again. But beneath the humor was a deeper shift, a renewed appreciation for life, family, and the thin line between adventure and peril. She spoke of returning someday, perhaps even to Mono Hot Springs, the place she never quite reached, but on her terms, with far more caution and gear. Her experience became a quiet but powerful reminder in the outdoor community. Nature is beautiful, awe-inspiring, and utterly indifferent. It rewards preparation, knowledge, and resilience, but it punishes hubris or oversight without mercy. Tiffany Slaton emerged from the mountains not just alive, but transformed, carrying lessons that would resonate far beyond her own story. Tiffany Slaton walked into the Sierra Nevada for what she thought would be a short, rejuvenating adventure, and walked out a survivor. From the violent fall off a mountainside, the agony of self-splinting her knee in the snow, the relentless blizzards that buried her world in white, the daily hunt for wild leeks under frozen ground, the nights huddled against rocks with only a lighter and a knife for company, to that final, miraculous discovery of an unlocked cabin just hours before collapse. She proved that the human spirit can endure far more than most of us ever imagine. Her story is not one of flawless heroism or dramatic rescue helicopters sweeping in at the last second. It is quieter, more human, a woman relying on skills she had quietly built over years, on mental discipline forged in other disciplines, on the stubborn refusal to let the wilderness win. It is about a family whose hope never fully broke, a resort owner whose small act of foresight changed everything, and a community of rescuers who kept searching even when logic said to stop. If you're planning your own outdoor trip, whether a weekend hike or a longer solo journey, carry Tiffany's words and lessons with you. Nature is beautiful, but it demands respect, preparation, humility, and a willingness to adapt when plans go wrong. Tell someone where you're going. Pack more than you think you'll need. Learn a few basic survival skills, and never underestimate your own capacity to keep going. Thanks for listening to this incredible true story of endurance and hope. If it moved you, if it made you think twice about your next adventure, share it and stay safe out there.